Okay, so welcome to lesson 2 of the Jewish value of giving. Um, those who are watching on YouTube, the link should be posted. The link to the student handout should be posted in the YouTube description. Those who are online, you should have gotten that in an email or on WhatsApp. So today's topic is titled The Benefits of Giving. What are the benefits of giving? Of course, this is a Jewish class, so we're going to focus primarily on the Jewish sources, on what are the benefits that are promised to us theologically in giving, but also some empirical data where we see the crossover. Of course, we know that when the Torah promises us something, it is true, and we don't need science to back it up. However, it's nice to see when science catches up with Torah and science reaffirms what we already know from our teachings. So the first, if you look in your handout, the big question is, if giving can feel like a loss, why does Judaism insist that tzedakah ultimately benefits the giver, right? At the end of the day, we're mathematical minds, and we know that if we have $100 and we keep $100, we'll have $100, right? 100 minus 0 is 100. 100 minus 10 equals 90. So mathematically, it would seem that there's no real case for giving away some of our money to charity. Certainly, if we're looking at it from the perspective of the giver. But the fact of the matter is, it's the Midrash teaches us in the book of Ruth. The Midrash says that as much as the benefactor helps the recipient helps the benefactor even more. Okay, so of course we understand how the benefactor is helping the recipient. He's giving him money. But how is the recipient benefiting the benefactor? We also have a similar concept in Pirkei Avot that says "Umi talmidai yoter mikulam," that I've learned much from my teachers and even more from my peers, and from my students I've learned even more. We're not going to go into that, but we see there's this parallel of somehow that when you're giving, you receive the most. So there's an interesting midrash from Parshas Tetzaveh, which talks about it addresses a verse in Proverbs which says, "Ner mitzvah v'Torah or." Mitzvah is a candle, and Torah is light. So the Midrash explains what exactly this means. And if you look in your primary sources, it's source number 2. The Midrash says, what is the meaning of the verse, "A mitzvah is a candle"? Proverbs 6:23. The Midrash explains, it often happens that people wish to perform a mitzvah, but their evil inclination persuades them not to. It tells them that they will lose money or deprive their children of future benefits. Their good inclination then tells them that they should perform the mitzvah, explaining, see, the Torah compares a mitzvah to a candle. Once a candle is lit, it can ignite 1,000 other candles, and its own light will remain in its original state undiminished. Similarly, when you perform a mitzvah, nothing will be diminished from your possessions. So it's interesting how that math works or doesn't work. Mathematically, we say money is a very black and white thing. You have it or you don't have it. But the Midrash is telling us that actually money is a blessing from God. And God's treasure house, God's storage house of blessings is not limited by any number. God is infinite, and so is his ability to give us blessings. So if God commands us to give charity, he's going to back up that command with the guarantee that doing that good thing won't cause any diminishment. And that's why the Midrash compares it to a candle, that you're not taking away from a fire when you light other candles with that fire. On the contrary, the entire room becomes warmer by the fact that there are multiple flames and greater amount of fire surrounding you, all because you extended that candle to another wick, lighting that too. And the same is true when it comes to tzedakah. That when we give others, we become warm as well. We receive those benefits. And logic would tell us, again, mathematically maybe not, but philosophically, it makes perfect sense. If God is telling us um, to let's say eat kosher, it only makes sense that that would be good for us physically as well. But what's interesting is that with most mitzvahs, God tells us you need to do the mitzvahs, the reward will come later. So sometimes a person eats kosher and they eat too many kosher hot dogs and they get sick, right? What do you mean? I ate kosher. How can doing a mitzvah harm me, right? I kept Shabbos and I lost my job. How many thousands and thousands of stories are there of Jews who came to America trying to make a living and they got fired every Shabbos, time and time again? I know my own grandfather came from Denmark to New York in the 50s. He had family that escaped Germany before the war, so he stayed by them and he figured, let me try to make a living in New York. And week after week, he'd get fired. After a few months of doing this is when my father was maybe 7 years old, so he didn't see his father for a half a year, and it was really difficult for him to not see his father for so long. But his father came back home and saying, listen, I don't see how I can be a religious Jew in America. And guess what? He didn't get rewarded for keeping Shabbos. On the contrary, Shabbos was the obstacle to him, making a living in the golden Medina, in the country of gold, in the land of opportunity. And so he left the land of opportunity back to Denmark and continued to make whatever meager living he made over there. Eventually, my father came back to America, and here I am today. But why do I say this? Because sometimes the reward for keeping Shabbos or any mitzvah doesn't happen in this world. The difference is, the exception to that rule is the mitzvah of tzedakah. Tzedakah is the only mitzvah where God tells us that you will receive the reward here in this world. In other words, 100 minus 10 not only equals 100, but actually equals 110. So how does that work? So in Parshas Re'eh, in the book of Deuteronomy, it's chapter 14, verse 22. We actually read this on some of the holidays, on Pesach, on Shmini Atzeres, and of course in the weekly Torah reading about a month before Rosh Hashanah, we read Aser to Aser, tithe you shall tithe. Now anybody who's studied Talmud knows that whenever the Torah uses a double expression and says, you should do this, you shall surely do this, it's to teach you something. For example, it says regarding a lost object, Hashev teshiveim la'achicha, return, you shall return it to your brother. And the Talmud learns from this, this means that if you try once to return it and you can't find the owner, you have to try again and again, even 100 times. This is to teach us the importance of returning a lost object. But I use that just as an example to say that whenever there's a double expression, there has to be a lesson over here. And so over here, there's actually an interesting story in the Talmud. But let's look at source 3 again. This is on page 2 of the handout. From Talmud Tractate Tanit, page 9. And the Talmud quotes, a tithe you shall tithe, aser to aser, Deuteronomy. The Talmud learns the double expression used in this commandment introduces a deeper meaning so that it can be understood as divine advice. Aser, give the tithe, in order that you will become wealthy. Aser bishvil shetis asher. It's a bit of a play on words. Give tithe so you should be wealthy. The word tithe is aser. The word wealthy is ashir, or tith asher means you shall become wealthy. So by the Torah duplicating that word, aser to aser, it's saying tithe, then fill in the blank, so that you will be asher. you shall be a wealthy person. So the Talmud makes this declaration, and then the Talmud gives a story that Rabbi Yochanan encountered the young son of Reish Lakish. If my memory serves me right, Reish Lakish was actually his brother-in-law. So I guess Reish Lakish's son was his nephew. Be it as it may, Rabbi Yochanan encounters this boy, and he says, "Tell me something you learned today, something that you learned in Torah." And he says, "I learned aser ta aser, that tithe you shall tithe." And Rabbi Yochanan asked him, "What does it mean? Why does the Torah repeat itself?" And the young boy, I'm sorry, the young boy asked Rabbi Yochanan, "This is what I learned. Can you please explain me why the Torah repeats itself?" And Rabbi Yochanan says, this idea that you shall tithe so that you shall become wealthy. So the boy pushed back on Rabbi Yochanan and says, "What do you mean? Where do you know this from?" So Rabbi Yochanan said, "Try it. Go test it." So the boy says, "Well, that's not so simple. We're not allowed to test God. There's a clear commandment in, I believe, Parshas Vayetchanan in Deuteronomy 6:16. It says, Lo tenasu es Hashem Elokechem. You shall not test the Lord your God. Trusting God means you don't test him. You have faith. You believe. God tells you to do something. You do it. You don't say, well, I'm going to keep Shabbos 1 week and somehow that's going to make me wealthy. I'm going to keep kosher for a week and then I'm going to be healthy. It doesn't work like that. You don't do it waiting for the results, and if the results are not as you expected, then no. We don't test God. So the boy challenges Rabbi Yochanan and says, what's this business of testing God? Aren't we not allowed to test God? So Rabbi Yochanan said that I learned from Rabbi Hoshea that it's indeed prohibited to test God with one exception. And that exception comes from the book of Trei Asar in the section of Malachi in chapter 3, verse 10. It says over there, Haviu es kol hamaiser el beis ha'otzar, bring all the tithe to the treasure house, the storage house, v'hiteref bevesi, and there shall be food to serve me, uvechanuni na bazais amar Hashem tzavakos. Test me now by this, says God. If I will not open for you the windows of heaven, and pour out for you a blessing that there shall be more than what is sufficient. This is what God says. You bring the treasure, you bring the tithe, you give what you have to give, and God will pour blessings infinitely. So not only does 100 minus 10 not equal 90, not only does it not equal 100, not only does it not equal 110, but 100 minus 10 equals ad infinitum, ad belidai. And as the song goes, till your lips will become numb from saying enough blessings already. I can't handle it anymore. That's the promise that God gives. And God specifically says, test me with this. Challenge me to this. Challenge me to see if I will pay you back. And that challenge means not in the next world, but in this world. When you do what you have to do, God will provide. Now that's just from the Jewish perspective. Here we have sources in the midrash and the Talmud and the prophets and Deuteronomy, etc. But just to bring this a little bit more contemporary, in the year 2000, Harvard did a study on happiness, and they sampled 632 Americans, asking them to report what their annual income is and how much of that income they spend on 4 different categories. The different categories were called bills or expenses, gifts to yourself, or what we call today in 2026, self-care. Okay. The third one was gifts for others, to friends, and just, buying your kids a Hanukkah present, whatever. And the fourth one was donations to charity. And so they categorized those 4, and then they did a happiness study, and they kind of put these they subdivided this into a total of two categories. So basically, spending on yourself, whether that's expenses or gifts for yourself, and the other category was spending on others, whether that's gifts or donations. And they tested a group of employees who just received a holiday bonus or whatever it was, a bonus at work, to see what their happiness level was based on what they did with that bonus that they received. So obviously, when it comes to expenses, sometimes your expenses are far more than your self-care and your gifts to others and your donations, etc. That's understandable. But for most people, when we get a bonus, that's our opportunity where we have some discretion in what we spend with. So they tested these people that got the bonus, and what they found was that the people who spent on others, whether that was gifts or donations, were a lot happier than those who spent on themselves. And what they found was that that even a minor alteration in their giving habits, even if it was $5, something very insignificant, even in the year 2000, just that little shift, they people who did that had a non-trivial, in other words, noticeable increase in happiness versus those who chose to spend the bonus on themselves. And so what they came up with that those who gave to charity actually had a 43% increase in happiness over the average reported people in that study. So there's just another contemporary example that we see that not only does it help, mathematically in Jewish math, that is, not actual math, but in Jewish math and God's blessing and being able to test God and see the returns, but also on a happiness level, on an emotional level, and a personal well-being level, charity ended up being the best investment. So instead of buying yourself a new pair of fancy slippers, if they donated that amount to charity, they felt much happier than the people who bought themselves the new slippers or whatever it might be. And I just want to end off with one Hasidic story. The story is told by Ramatul Rifkin, who he together with Abba Pliskin used to raise money for the underground yeshivas during the communist regime in Russia. And they approached a donor who had been giving them money for that underground yeshiva in previous years, and they asked him, can you repeat your gift this year? And he said, business was tough this year, and I can't do it. So Abba Pliskin tells him, I want to tell you a mashal. I want to tell you an analogy. Says there was once a store owner that he had a small shop, and he'd have to buy merchandise from a faraway town and schlep the merchandise back to his village and try to sell it for a profit. And it so happened one time that he was on the wagon with all his merchandise, and he and the wagon driver got caught in a storm, and the wagon's wheels got stuck in the mud and they couldn't schlep it out. So the wagon driver said, look, this is such a heavy load, we're not going to get out of here unless you throw some of the merchandise overboard, and who knows when the next wagon's going to come, but it's the only way. Now the store owner was very bothered. This is his life's earnings. This is how he's going to make money for the year. So he says, I can't let go of the merchandise. The wheels on the wagon, they're very, very heavy wheels. Maybe we take off the wheels and then the wagon will move. So Abba Pliskin used this analogy to say, this is what tzedakah is. Sometimes we look at tzedakah, it's such a burden. It's weighing down the wagon. How am I going to move? These wheels are so heavy. But the truth of the matter is, the wheels are the things that allow the merchandise to move. It's what allows everything to flow. So if we want the blessings, if we want God to provide everything we need, you have to have the wheels turning. And giving tzedakah, those are the wheels that help everything else function the way they're supposed to. Yes, does that mean that you might have to throw some of your merchandise overboard? Okay, yeah, there might be a temporary loss. But ultimately, you can't move forward without wheels. And that's what tzedakah is all about. Thank you so much for joining, and please join us next week for a discussion on how much to give and what Judaism says about that. Is it 10% exactly? Is it net worth? Is it growth? Is it, and all those questions, basically all your Jewish tax questions will be answered in lesson 3.